What's going on, everybody? Appreciate you tuning in on this Wednesday night. Another wild one here in the association. We got to see a couple more playoff games going on. We're a few games in now to the second round, and feels like a good time to get a gauge on where we are with the potential KD market. Now, again, they're looking at moving him on this offseason. The Suns are. It's been back and forth a little bit, but all signs point towards the breakup happening in a mutual way. And I've been saying since the start of the playoffs, if you are a Suns fan, you need to be locked into what's going on in the postseason right now because it's going to dictate what team likely KD gets traded to and what kind of pieces you can get in return. Because what you want, dream case scenario, is teams with a lot of assets that figured to be in win now, have some heartbreaking loss, or they have some glaring weakness exposed, and then they press that panic button. Because if they do that, then you're going to end up getting a lot on return for KD services, and it looks like we might have a few potential suitors now after the first round and how things are kind of shaping up here in the second round. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through some of those teams and look at which ones keep your eye on. Start monitoring what's going on with them. So you look at the teams that had the biggest expectations going into the playoffs that have fallen on their face. The team leading that charge is the Los Angeles Lakers. There's a lot of people that thought they had a chance at winning the championship, and they got bounced in the first round 4-1. And it wasn't particularly close even in that 4-1 series. Problem is, that ain't going to work. I mean, they got Luka, who's about to sign a supermax. They got LeBron still on a massive contract, and they're tied up salary cap elsewhere without a lot of really good pieces, not a lot of draft picks. That's not the team that the Phoenix Suns are going to want to try and make a deal with. Clippers, probably the same thing. I mean, Harden doesn't exactly look like a team or a player that people really want in the postseason right now after he had his shortcomings well documented again. I mean, you're going after Kawhi, you're going after Powell. Clippers, that doesn't seem like the mix. They might have a couple picks, but, I mean, timid on that one. That's not the one you want to look at. Grizzlies, yeah. I think they're more looking at that they want to kind of see where they are next season with the healthy Ja. If he's able to stay on the court, you get Triple J back, and you kind of just build off of that and see where you are, because I don't know if they really have a good feeling on where they are just yet. So that gets us through the West, besides the number one team that the name has been thrown around there. A lot of people thought that they were a little bit of fool's gold. The Houston Rockets. That's getting spicy. That's getting really spicy for a number of reasons. Now, you could say, hey, they went 7 games, that they had their chances against the Warriors, and that why would you want to break it up? Because the way they lost. Towards the end of that series, they had nobody that could go just get them a bucket. Fred VanVleet had a few good games, and then once he kind of got cold and they didn't have anyone left, it felt like this team just didn't have anybody in a half court that can make a shot. Now, Amen Thompson is awesome. Like, I am a huge fan of him. But you start looking at the bench, Jalen Green really had a rough series. Jabari Smith really had a kind of a rough series. Shooting the ball are kind of created. They don't have those elements. Now, though, there's upside on both those guys. Fred VanVleet's on an expiring contract. They got draft picks. They got the draft picks that used to belong to the Suns. They could get their picks back. This is a team that a lot of people thought was a perfect fit for both sides, and it played out just the way that Suns fans should want, because it showed them and it kind of proved what everyone thought about this team, that you can't play that up and down tempo and that they need a bucket getter in. Even at his age, KD's still one of the best bucket getters in this entire league. Beautiful fit. Beautiful case scenario on how they fell apart down the stretch for the Suns. And now they're going to have an opportunity to kind of try and get a little bit more out of that trade, because there's going to be some desperation out of the Rockets where they look at this roster and say, it ain't it. We need to shake things up a little bit and start making a move. You go to the East. I mean, everyone keeps saying the Heat. I don't know what the Heat are doing right now. It finally looks like maybe Heat culture is kind of consuming itself, because there is just not that much talent left on this roster. Bam, I think, has regressed the last few years. Tyler Hero didn't do anything in this postseason, and they just got blasted by the Cavaliers in that first round. So I guess if you think, but I don't think that makes them even close to contenders. And so it doesn't feel like the right fit. They have some pieces, they have some things in a trade that would work. I feels like this playoffs really said and showed they're nowhere near right now, and it's time to go ahead and hit the reset button. But if they can convince themselves that they're not that far off and that they just needed a few more things, and maybe they could say like the Jimmy Butler headache distracted them and kind of threw this team off, and now that they'll have kind of clean decks this offseason, that maybe they'll be in a better spot, and the KD really kind of puts them in that mix. I don't see it. I'd have a hard time talking myself into it if I was Pat Riley, but maybe. So I would keep them on the very cool side. The Pistons, interesting. They lose 4-2. They had some nice moments. I tend to think they look at themselves as a team that says, hey, like, we had a great season. We were kind of expecting to be here. Let's build off this. Let's keep this core together, and let's like push forward. Just because of where the expectations were. No one kind of expected them to have this year to get to the 60th seed, to have Cade Cunningham become a legitimate all-star, legitimate at some, maybe in that 5 to 7 range MVP candidate. Like, he had an incredible year. I feel like even with this loss, they're more tilted towards let's run it back and just build off of this, rather than we need to go get one more guy to try and get us over the top. Magic clearly needs some help. Now, they had a couple big injuries this year, but they got two young studs in Paulo and Franz, and like, they can score, they can do some things. KD doesn't fit for along those two guys that great. They do need some shooting, but what they really need is a point guard. Like, desperately need is a point guard. And so I can't see them going after KD. Like, their offseason has got to be to get a 3-and-D guy and then also a point guard, and just let those two young guys cook. I can't see them really trying to go after KD, so I wouldn't say them either. Now the Bucks. The Bucks are interesting. The Bucks are going to blow that thing up for a number of reasons. What happened with Dame was awful. Seeing his knee just get blown out like that. He's going to miss probably all of next year, if not, 90% of it at least. And where Giannis is with this team, with the way they are going to not be able to make moves because of their contracts that they have on there, it looks like Giannis would be on the move. And everyone kind of is speculating, kind of expects them to both say we've had a good run and let him kind of go on to the next phase as they hit restart. Now, I don't think this works out for the Suns, in that I think they are looking for young assets and kind of to reboot a little bit. And I think the same would be said for the Bucks. So it doesn't really make too much sense for them to bring in KD and everything like that. But it's just that if they could, contracts kind of line up. You got to throw in a lot more of everything that's like you would have. They've been ripping the cabinets and everything and kind of going bare. The Suns have when they've been making these trades. They have a tiny bit left in there. You would have to empty the chamber. And if you did, Booker, whatever version of Beal you get, and Giannis, and two guys from the YMCA, it'd be fun. It'd be entertaining. So those are the first teams that got knocked out. I think of those ones, the Rockets are certainly the one you got to keep your eye on. Heat are cool. I think that the temperature on where they were at the start of the playoffs versus now has cooled off. Bucks have gotten hotter from where they were at the start of the playoffs, but I just don't think that the trade partners line up well between the two of them. And then I think Pistons are kind of another one you got to kind of at least monitor and keep up with. As for the teams still left in, hard to say because you have to wait and see kind of what happens on these playoff runs. But the Warriors are still going to be an interesting team because they're going to look at what they have and say, we got 1, maybe 2 years left to try and do this with Curry and with this squad that we have. Maybe there's an opportunity there. The Timberwolves, I don't see it happening that way, but they did trade, to get Julius Randle. Maybe you can convince them that what they really need is another shooter, another scorer. Maybe. Depends on how this series, if they continue to shoot like they are right now, which is horrid, historically bad, then maybe you can convince them to give you a couple of their young defensive pieces. You probably have to take on the Julius Randle contract, and you can get some picks. It's not bad. The interesting one, the really interesting one, is what happens with the Thunder. It's a great storyline, him going home. But they won by about $1 billion tonight, and they looked incredible, even after they lost game 1 to Denver. If they do lose this series, I'm so interested to see what they end up doing. Does Presti, their GM, look at this roster and say, hey, we had a few games where we looked unstoppable, and then we just ended up having, a couple games that didn't go our way. That's what happened. But if we could just paste this together, put it all together, we'll be fine. Kind of depends on how they lose. If assuming that they would lose a series, depends on how they look like in those other 3 losses, or if they move on to the next Western Conference Finals and lose there or something. But they have 1 million young pieces on good contracts. They got 30 first-round draft picks. And at some point, you have to consolidate that for a big-name player and try and make a run at this thing if you don't win it this year. There's a lot of Thunder fans that want to keep it the same and run it back and then just let guys go in free agency and keep using your first-round draft picks to try and reload the team. Here's the thing. I know they've had some success with first-round picks, but that's a pool that runs dry. It's not guaranteed that every single time you're going to keep finding guys that can give you good quality minutes like Case and Wallace late in the first round. Those guys just don't always happen. And you're going to lose a lot of this roster to the free agency. And some of it this offseason, a lot of it the year after that, because they're going to get very pricey. But depends on what happens. If they can bounce back and win this whole series and kind of go on, they probably run it back. If they have some sort of embarrassing meltdown and if Jalen Williams comes up short in the postseason again, they are definitely a team to keep your eye on. Side note, weird note. Thunder fans really don't like KD still. They have a hard time with the way that he left and everything. It'd be very interesting to see the reception that he would get in OKC if he did get traded back there, because I don't know how the fans would take it. They really don't like him. They were really unhappy with the way they left the first time. Over in the East, Cavaliers, Pacers. Cavaliers falling apart at the seams. It looks like complete health. Just missing 3 starters, and the Pacers pull off an insane comeback. I still weirdly don't hate the Cavaliers' chances in this series, but the problem is now, even if they were to lose it, they're going to look at their injuries and say, we should have had them, but this is it. They're not going to want to really shake too many things up. Pacers maybe, but Pacers are kind of overachieving right now, and so I don't know why they would decide to shake things up or change it up when you're doing better than kind of what you expected. Knicks and Celtics. Knicks don't have a ton of flexibility, a lot of options. KD to New York would be pretty cool, though. Not a lot of Tibbs only plays like 5.5 guys, so it's really hard to kind of get a good gauge on what they got on their roster, what they got on their bench. It would have to be for draft picks. And it feels early. They're only down 2 games. It kind of feels like we already saw the best version of the Celtics, doesn't it? Kind of feels like their championship window, they just don't look the same. Jaylen Brown has been banged up, and they've been up big in both these games, and you'd think they'd be fine, and that should be the narrative, that they just blew a couple of historic leads, but they just don't look like they did last year. This team all looks quite a bit older, and I don't think they have a lot because, how much they have in the second apron, how much they've spent on this team, a ton of options in trades. I don't know if KD's the right fit either, because they all seem a little bit younger there, but maybe you can get them to move off of Pritchard. Maybe you can get them, to get you some of those young guys that they kind of play in rotation and some draft picks if they wanted to go KD and say like Horford retired or something like that, and they kind of were able to kind of make some moves, but they're pretty limited. But they are starting to fall apart, and so they might end up being one of those desperate teams. So, quick look at all of those teams that are in the playoffs gives you an idea. Keep your eyes locked on the Rockets. That is definitely the clear leader in the clubhouse right now. Few other teams that we thought would be in the mix that I think fell out, like the Heat, and a few teams that I don't think anybody really kind of thought were going to be anywhere around, and yet they certainly have now entered the chat. In the Clippers, in possibly the Celtics. So some new names, some new possible trade machines that you got to get to work on, but the KD sweepstakes are certainly heating up at this point, and it's going to be fun to see where it goes.